Welcome back to the Fantasy Slant powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe, here for another one. And with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Ross Miles. Ross, on a little bit of a vacation, recording on holiday, as they say over there in England. So what's up, man?
Yeah, just enjoying myself on holiday, seeing the parents for a long weekend. But Jeff, we haven't recorded a show in a couple of weeks. We have a lot of football to talk about and a lot of IDP news.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff going on now. We're a week into training camp. News is coming hard and heavy, but before we get to that, just a few plugs. If you haven't already subscribed to our Fantasy Gold Premium product, what are you waiting for? It's only going to cost you $24.99 to get access to award-winning projections, award-winning rankings, award-winning content. I think you're seeing a theme here, and stuff that you're not going to get anywhere else. You really like Mike Clay's unique stats, his OTD, his ADOT. You love our PPO stat. You're not getting this anywhere except Pro Football Focus Fantasy, so make sure you go out and get that if you're not already a subscriber. But maybe you don't want to necessarily go full force just yet. You can pick up our draft guide to see what we have to offer. You get a PDF copy that was updated yesterday for $4.99. You're not gonna see that on newsstands, folks. That's stuff that you're buying in magazines and newsstands. That was written in May and published in early June, so it's not fully updated. So if you want the most recent access to the most recent information, then go out and get our draft guide. One other thing I should mention, if you don't want to spend that whole $24.99 and you're interested possibly in dabbling in daily games, we have a partnership with DraftKings, which is a fantastic site for all things daily fantasy sports, not just football. But if you head over there, you deposit $10, just $10, using the promo code PFF, the three letters in a row, PFF, you'll get Fantasy Gold for free. So $24.99 value for $10, and you'll get a 100% deposit bonus, so you really can't lose on that. And hey, you don't even have to play. We don't care if you play. Just sign up and get Fantasy Gold on the cheap. All right, Ross, with all of that out of the way, boy, oh boy, there's so much to talk about. So much to talk about on the offensive side of the ball, too. Marshawn Lynch ending his holdout. Josh Gordon meeting with Harold Henderson, which that name just keeps cracking me up every time I say it. But we're here to talk IDP today, and I think where we'll start is with another player who's had off-field issues, Aldon Smith. Now, he's scheduled to meet with the commish on August 8th, and obviously they're going to talk about his off-field transgressions in the offseason, and a suspension is potentially looming. We're speculating this is going to be a 4 to 6 game suspension, and, you know, taking that on the context, Ross, I know we both really love Smith's upside as a sack asset, especially in big play scoring leagues, but does this cause you to, move him down? I mean, let's say he does get that 4 game, the low end. Are you moving him down in your rankings? Are you still going to take a chance on him and stash him just for those 4 games, knowing what you can get when he comes back on the field?
Yeah, he's a really difficult one, Jeff, to place. I mean, I've just checked our rankings. I've got him 51. You've got him 46 for linebackers. So we're both in the kind of opinion that he's right down there. And what's that, LB4, LB5 territory? I think with 4 games, there's more reason to take a risk. 6 games is difficult. 6 games is half of a fantasy season, pretty much. I think it depends on how good you are at managing your roster, how confident you are in finding sleepers. If you get a couple of solid linebackers at good value, maybe you take a chance on Smith as your 3rd or 4th linebacker. But you've got to be strategic. You've got to be careful. You might be playing some waiver wire to cover him if you don't hit with all your draft picks.
Yeah, it's right, too. You really have to be strategic, because part of my strategy with late round picks in a lot of these fantasy drafts is to draft players fully knowing that there is a good chance I could be cutting these players within the first couple weeks of the season if they don't hit. So you really want that flexibility so you can really attack the waiver wire early in the season. Especially if you're in a auction setup, a fab setup, then your auction money consistently loses value over the course of the season. You get the ultimate value out of your auction money in the first week of the season. Second week of the season, you're not, gradually going to decrease there. So you want that flexibility. So can you still pull that off? That's ultimately the question. And Ross, just as an aside, I'm sort of in the minority of IDP analysts in that I absolutely love team defenses as well. And so I think, it takes all types. And, hey, I don't care what type of fantasy league you play in. I just care that you play fantasy. Go out and play. It doesn't matter what it is. So team defense wise, I've seen San Francisco ranked very high in a lot of industry rankings. And for me, this is really concerning because Navarro Bowman out for half the season. Aldon Smith potentially out for at least a quarter of the season. I don't see how you can draft San Francisco as one of the top 4 or 5 defenses off the board in terms of fantasy defense. I'm staying far away from them.
Oh, no, I'm with you on that. I mean, fantasy defense is all about sacks. Sacks power your fantasy defense, and it sets up other turnovers and more points. And without Alden Smith and without Bowman making it easier for Smith to get off the edge, I think you can't really take San Francisco this year unless, do you take two? I'd stream them. I don't even think they should go in the top 12, to be honest. And if you're playing in a league with more than 12 teams, maybe then they get picked up. But I'd have them outside the top 10 now.
Well, they probably will get drafted. A lot of people just don't pay attention to this off season sort of movement and issues, and just simply assume that last year's production equals this year's production. Hey, if we assume that in 2012 one of the best fantasy defenses was the Chicago Bears, in 2013 one of the worst fantasy defenses was the Chicago Bears, so you can't really do that. You have to pay close attention to what's going on with these teams. And yeah, you're right. Later on in the season, certainly down the stretch, they're going to be an asset. So that's something to keep under your hat. If that owner of San Francisco drops them, they may become a streamable option. But then once Aldon Smith is back and Navarro Bowman is back, then certainly now they're a legit top 10 fantasy defense. All right, Ross, a player who I think has left a bad taste in a lot of folks' mouths in IDP leagues is Brad Jones. Now, both you and I have sort of remained true to Brad Jones and consistently ranked him inside our top 40 all off season. And of course, I think our support has been justified. Of course, obviously the Packers coaching staff is reading what we're putting out there because they have named Jones the only every down linebacker in Green Bay. Of course, they're not paying attention to us, but still, our faith was rewarded, Ross. He's playing in the nickel. He's playing in the dime. He's out there every snap over A.J. Hawk. Always had my concerns about A.J. Hawk. And this is great news. And what's even more interesting, Ross, is that currently, if you go over to my fantasy league, who really, if you're looking for IDP, ADP data, then my fantasy league is typically your best resource. Most sites just don't have IDP, ADP data. So he's going undrafted, Ross. This is an absolute steal right now for Brad Jones if you're picking him up after 50 linebackers have gone off the board. But the question, how high can this guy perform? Where do you ultimately see him? I mean, we both have him in the mid-30s range in our ranking. Are we too low?
I think we might be, Jeff. I mean, I'm looking at our rankings right now, and knowing he's going to be an every down linebacker in that defense, a defense where we've seen people like Desmond Bishop be a legit IDP threat for like top 5 linebackers. I don't think he's going to get that high. But if we're looking at Donald Butler, consensus rank 26, Darryl Smith, consensus 25, DeMarco Ryans 24, I think we can slide him right into that range, right at the bottom of the LB2 tier. And I don't want to say sky's the limit, but he could definitely push his way up and be more consistent than that. I mean, we've got Perry Riley, consensus ranked 18, and that's on a little bit of shaky ground, and so is Freeman and DeQuell Jackson 19-20. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him get up to that high. I mean, I think we're going to need to study the numbers in a bit more detail, but he's a player who's put up plenty of tackles and double-digit tackle games in the past, so he's a guy that is probably going to end up being on a lot of my rosters if he continues to have such a low ADP.
I do like Perry Riley just because of the situation, and it's kind of like who else is going to make tackles there, and obviously a stat-friendly home stats crew or a tackle-friendly home stats crew. But Jones, it's really intriguing. I'm still slotting him. Next ranking update, I'm probably going to bump him up just a little bit, but I'm still comfortable generally where I have him in the LB3 kind of upside area. But again, that's that situation. Who's going to make the tackles there? It looks like Jones is going to have plenty of opportunity. It's also also there's going to be benefit here for Morgan Burnett. He's going to, obviously see lots of opportunity. If they're running a lot of these dime packages, which we have seen out of Green Bay in the past. So something certainly to consider there. Keep Brad Jones on your list. Highlight him. He's somebody you can get later on in drafts. Nobody's thinking about, and absolute great value. Now, Ross, it seems that the consensus of the industry is starting to come down a little bit, as I've been banging the drum on this one for a while, on Audie Cole. Audie Cole I have way outside of my top 50. I think he's outside of my top 60 now. And news out of Vikings camp shows some interesting things. Okay, Chad Greenway, there was talk that he might move to the middle. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. He's going to stay on the weak side in the base package with Anthony Barr playing on the strong side. The question is who plays in the middle, and whoever plays in the middle is likely to see an every down role unless they rotate base and sub-package linebackers there. But right now, just as we saw in off-season activities, Jasper Brinkley is getting the lion's share of the reps with the first team in the middle. To me, that's alarming. It's been alarming. It'll continue to be alarming. And Audie Cole really shouldn't even be on draft boards at this point. Ross, are you still hanging on to hope for Audie Cole?
I'm hanging on to a little bit, Jeff, but I have definitely come off him in my rankings. He's now currently ranked 36th in the linebackers by me. You've got him, yeah, like you said, outside the top 60 at 62. Like you said, the fact that we're getting reports out that they're testing out Greenway in the middle, that's a little bit concerning. I mean, not only for Brinkley and Cole. I mean, it's just, I think they're just testing out the waters with their linebackers and working out who's going to fit in where. Although there is that possibility of the every down role in the middle, like you say, if they win that job, I'm not convinced that there won't be some changes mid-season to whoever wins the job, because it just seems like they're not happy with the choices they've got. I do think there is some value here, but it's hard to find it right now. You should stop drafting Audie Cole and start drafting Brad Jones, and maybe try and get Audie Cole as a last-round flyer, or Brinkley, depending on who you think is going to win that battle. I'm still going to give it slightly to Cole. I just see a little bit more upside. Just don't see Brinkley holding down a free-down role if he gets there. I see him as too much of a thumper, so that's what puts me off Brinkley a little bit.
Well, one of the players that really hasn't been talked about in this battle too much is Michael Mauti out of Penn State. And, he's still there. He's still in the mix. And of any of these players, he's probably the best suited to play three downs. He was a really dynamic player at Penn State, but he suffered 3 ACL injuries in college. I mean, that is really tough to overcome. But it's not the death sentence it was 15 years ago. I mean, look what we just saw last season out of Thomas Davis, who also has suffered 3 ACLs in his career. Davis was awesome last year, so it's not necessarily that the nail in Mauti's coffin is there. He could potentially be a surprise, but we'll have to see what fleshes out in camp. Still, you dynasty owners, Mauti is somebody, hey, put him on a taxi squad, and if it's a deep dynasty league, and maybe you get something out of him. Ross, a lot of talk about players losing weight. On the offensive side, LaShawn McCoy has said he stopped eating Doritos. He's lost about 5 to 7 pounds. That's the secret, folks. Stop eating those Doritos. And C.J. Anderson dropped 20 pounds since minicamp, that's a pretty significant amount of weight. He probably cut out more than just Doritos. Maybe the McDonald's is cut out of that too. Looking much lighter at 215 pounds. We also hear that Mason Foster, on the defensive side of the ball, 7 pounds lighter. I always cracks me up with 7 pounds because you can gain and lose water weight really quickly, and you can gain and lose a couple pounds worth of water weight. So what's the difference between 5 and 7 pounds? Nothing. But still, he is a little bit lighter, and this is important because in that Lovie Smith Tampa 2/cover 2, you always hear Tampa 2, cover 2. What's the difference? Well, cover 2 is when your safeties are covering half of the field. Essentially they have that sort of zone back there. Cover 2 actually is more, or Tampa 2 is actually more like a cover 3 because the middle linebacker is often dropping back. So you sort of split it up into thirds back there. So it really requires a fast linebacker. I mean, look at who is the quintessential Tampa 2 linebacker in recent memory? Brian Urlacher, right? One of the fastest linebackers that we saw, especially early in his career. So versatile. And Foster's trying to lose some weight to get some of that speed so he can, cover the tight ends, he can cover the running backs in the deep third of the field. Now, the question ultimately with Foster is he even going to get the chance to stay on the field, Ross? And if you look at our rankings, Ross, you're a little bit higher on him than I am. You have him at 31, I am at 38. I don't think either one of them is too far off base. In fact, maybe splitting the difference is exactly where he should be, because we've seen big numbers out of Foster in two-down role in the past, so he even can be fantasy relevant in that. But I guess, with this news, with your ranking, just what's your general thoughts on Foster entering the 2014 season?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Foster is he has been kind of labelled as a two-down thumper and restricted to a two-down role. They said, he isn't that great in coverage, struggles to turn the ball over. Yet we saw him take some leaps and bounds forward last year. He made an interception or two, proved himself to be a little bit more able. The thing is he going to be able to do it for the whole season? Is there a little bit of sample size issues here? We've just seen him make a few interceptions and we're extrapolating that out. I do think he will be an every down linebacker, but it's just, are they going to keep him in this role all season? He is someone I'm very keen on to land as an LB3 on my roster, because I think there's that upside there. But equally so, if I do get Foster as my third linebacker, I'm probably going to want to make sure I'm not drafting an Alden Smith as my fourth linebacker. I want someone who I can have a little bit more confidence in, because there's this kind of issue if Foster can hold up as a three-down linebacker for a whole season.
Yeah, Brad Jones could be that guy where you may even get multiple. I guess that's sort of the goal with your third, your fourth linebackers, is drafting guys who might be a little bit under the radar, who have LB2 upside. Jones has that. Foster has that in an every down role, but that's ultimately the question. He struggled so much in coverage so far, but maybe a scheme change helps. A lot of times these players are more scheme dependent than we actually realize. It's not like you just throw guys out and they just play. The scheme certainly helps the system. Now, another linebacker situation I just want to briefly mention is in Atlanta. And hopefully you're like me, you're fired up for Hard Knocks. I watched the 1-minute preview of Hard Knocks where they just showed players' faces. I watched it like 2 or 3 times yesterday. I'm just so fired up for it. Can't wait, and I hope they really highlight this linebacker situation, because Sean Weatherspoon out for the season, right? And he was really their best bet, aside from maybe Paul Warlow, but Paul Warlow with Weatherspoon there was a bit of a question mark. Now it looks like Warlow is going to be pretty much locked into that every down role. He's running with the starters, and so is Joplo Bartu. Bartu, a very low fantasy ceiling, but he's the favorite, especially with Pat Angerer going through the NFL concussion protocol. Folks, anybody holding out hope for Angerer ever again, I don't think it's ever going to happen. It was sort of the right place and the right time for Angerer when he put up those big numbers with Indy a few seasons back. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. Also here, Atlanta is kicking the tires on Nick Barnett, who played with Washington briefly. Well, not briefly. He played 14 games, but he didn't see a lot of snaps last season. But Ross, I want to pull the conversation back to Warlow and Bartu. What are your expectations for these two guys in 2014?
Yeah, well, Warlow's a guy who's been steadily creeping up my rankings. It's a guy who we talked a lot about at the end of last season, thanks to that 219 total tackle games back to back. He was, and then he had a 16 total tackle game later in the season, so he was really on fire and sort of made himself an LB1, or at least at that scoring rate he was. And we both kind of agreed he was going to be an LB2 this season, but we've seen Alonso out for the season, we've seen Sean Lee go out for the season. We've seen Darrell Washington suspended. So there's a whole group of LB1s that have now suddenly not there. Obviously, Washington's gone as well, which increases the likelihood that Warlow is going to be making tackles, being around the ball as a three-down middle linebacker. So Warlow's steadily creeped up in my rankings. I think I've got him just inside the top 12 in a minute. It might be as high as number 10. So Warlow's a guy I'm interested in, but Bartu, again, I'm keeping an eye on him. He's not a guy I've picked up in too many drafts. I guess I'm probably more focusing on a little bit on Prince Shambo, the rookie, just trying to pick him up really late in dynasty drafts or off the free agency after a rookie draft, just because I'm not totally sold on Bartu. I think he's interesting, but I think he's the kind of player that could get beaten out of that role, and maybe Shambo's the guy to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sold on Shambo. Just watching this guy going back, really taking a look at what he did in college. He was an outside pass rusher. I don't see how he translates to an inside linebacker. Remember, we're probably going to see a lot more three-man fronts out of Atlanta this year. I just don't see how that transition takes place. And I don't know. I'm not really high on him. I think that Bartu is probably the better bet there, especially given he's a pretty good run defender. He's a little suspect in coverage, but then again, so is Warlow. So is pretty much everybody they have on their roster, and I don't see how Shambo is going to be much of an improvement. Again, to each their own. For me, it's going to be tough. But Ross, I'm taking a look. Ross and I actually are involved in the Roto World IDP draft, mock draft right now. And just getting a look here, let's see. Warlow is the 3rd, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th linebacker off the board. And I think that's a fairly solid spot for him. If you're getting him there, I think he's easily a top 10 linebacker. I have him as number 9, so I think that's solid value. That was the great Jamie Eisenberg from over at CBS who took him there. Looks like, were you looking at him because Ross is right after? Ross took a linebacker right after that, and you took Brian Cushing, which is a solid pick there. Were you looking at
I had Cushing ranked just above Warlow, but they were my 1 and 2. I had, because I'm quite close together at the end of the round, and that was my pick at the start of the next round. I think I'm picking something like 8th and 4th. So I considered a linebacker with my pick at like whatever it was, 9.8, 10.8, but ended up taking a tight end in Carl Rudolph because I felt that with both Cushing and Warlow there, I thought these guys, someone's going to come back to me around the other side, and I'll take which one that does. So I had Cushing slightly above him, so I was pleased with getting either one of those. I think they're like my 9th and 10th ranked linebackers at the minute. So yeah, Warlow's a guy I fancy owning in quite a few leagues. I feel like I can probably get him as my 2nd linebacker because, like you said, he's sometimes slipping outside those top 12. I'm normally going to get an LB1, and when I start looking for my LB2, as long as Warlow's on the board, he's one of the ones I like to consider strongly.
Yeah, absolutely. And just looking at this draft, I mean, I get these tweets, and I'm sure, Ross, you get these tweets all the time right now. When do I start drafting IDPs? I'm new to IDP leagues, or even I'm a little bit of a vet, but I still don't feel comfortable knowing exactly when to pull the trigger. In this draft, in terms of linebackers, obviously J.J. Watt went, and Robert Quinn went very early in this draft.
Mm-hmm.
Linebackers started coming off the board at the tail end of the 4th round. Kuechly, Posluszny, David, and Burfict all went within 12 picks of each other. Then we don't see another IDP until the 8th round, when our buddy Sigmund Bloom took Patrick Willis. That is exactly what you want to do, folks. Sigmund is one of the best in the business, and that is exactly what you want to do. Willis, his ceiling is right with all of those guys, and Sigmund got him 2.5 rounds later.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Willis at exactly the same time because I'm with you. I won't start IDP until generally around round 7 or 8. I say that with the caveat that obviously if someone like Watt or Quinn starts slipping through round 4, well, to round 5 or 6, maybe then because they're so elite. I mean, the thing is, I just look at my board and there's normally offensive players that I'm like, well, I definitely want that guy on my roster. So, some of the running backs you can pick up in round 5 and the wide receivers you can pick up in round 5, 6, and 7. If you're taking linebackers, when we're saying to you, you can get a Patrick Willis, a Paul Warlow, a Brian Cushing in rounds 8 and 9, you're costing yourself by drafting a linebacker in rounds 5, 6, 7 for me.
Oh, absolutely. And, coming out of the first 8 rounds, I didn't draft my first IDP until the 9th round. Mm-hmm. I had 3 running backs, 4 wide receivers, and Matthew Stafford. And I'm really, really, really happy with how my team is shaping out. And I grabbed Derek Johnson in the 9th round. I mean, you can't beat that.
I saw that, Jeff, because Johnson was when I took my first linebacker, which was Wagner. The choice was Willis had just gone. I ended up taking Wagner over Johnson, and I saw in our rankings or your rankings that you have Johnson quite high, and so do I. So when I saw these linebackers go, I was like, Johnson's still hanging around, and then lo and behold, you popped up and took him after. He was probably the 11th linebacker off the board when you picked, and he's your number 5 in your projections, I believe. So that was some great value there.
Very, very happy with that. Now, Ross, a player who went in the 7th round of this mock draft, who we've certainly debated. We debated in one of our roundtables this offseason, is Jason Pierre-Paul. He went at the very beginning of the 7th round, 3rd defensive lineman off the board. I've been quite vocal about my disdain for taking him that early. Again, every player you have your breaking point on, and I've sort of stuck my flag in the ground and put him outside of my top 10. Very few folks in the industry, I think, are doing that right now, but to me, it's about proving it. However, the news is positive for Pierre-Paul. There is a night and day, quote-unquote, night and day difference between his camp performance this year and last year, and I'm assuming this year is the day aspect of it. But he looks quicker. He says he's 110%, which somebody should inform him is actually impossible. But regardless, he still looks good. maybe, just maybe, I might be moving him up a little bit. But Ross, is this just further evidence to support your position?
I don't think it's evidence. This is just hot air in the off season, Jeff. I think you have a view on JPP. I'm at the point where he's my fourth defensive end. As we said in the round table, it's Watt and Quinn, 1A and 1B. Then I think you have to go Chandler Jones 3, and then there's that kind of whole band of defensive ends like Ware, Mario Williams, and JPP. Greg Hardy. I mean, and I think we can question all of them. I just feel the only question about JPP, the only question is his own physical well-being, and this is all positive. I'm willing to buy into JPP. I'm really happy with him. Number 4, and he's the kind of guy I end up taking. So I've been doing lots of IDP only drafts, and quite often, if JPP's there for me in round 3, I'll take him. So that means he's normally. That means at least 24 people are off the board before he goes. Normally maybe as many as 30. He doesn't tend to last outside of round 3. If you can see him so outside the top 36, he's normally gone before then. So if you like JPP, you tend to have to grab him in those top 24 to 30 players of IDP players.
Yeah, that's fair. I still think it's a little risky, and we're now in the end of the 11th round. I think there's something like 12 defensive ends off, or defensive linemen, I guess you'd call it, off the board, because it's just a DL position. I've yet to even attack the position. I think there's a little bit of value that we can have later on. It's going to be a roller coaster ride with pretty much any player, but I'd rather have that roller coaster ride with a player I draft in the 14th round as opposed to a player I draft in the 7th round. It's just so much more frustrating. But Ross, another thing I want to point out about this mock draft, and we'll use it to flesh out some of this, the news that we've seen here, is that, hey, we're almost in the 12th round. Not a single defensive back has come off the board. I expect it to start to happen soon, but that's a great lesson to learn if you're, looking for a strategy here in IDP drafts, which with a full roster of IDPs. You don't want to draft these defensive backs, even the elite level guys, even Harrison Smith, Barry Church, Cyprian, Weddle, Burnett. You still want to wait on those guys because there's much better value to be had at other positions, and linebackers and defensive linemen are going to go off the board a lot earlier. But Ross, a couple notes from the defensive back situation in Arizona. With Deon Buchanan, this is a guy who we're really excited about, the rookie. And what makes it even more exciting is he's going to play this hybrid linebacker in nickel and dime packages, and he'll be a strong safety on early downs, playing close to the line of scrimmage. This just screams IDP production. So right now, I think we have him in our sort of 20s range. Is there a chance this guy cracks the top 15 this season?
If he's going to play as a linebacker in nickel and dime packages, I think there is a chance, Jeff. The thing is, like we say, the defensive back tier is so deep. I mean, you listed a lot of players that are all elite, and you didn't even say the names Tyvon Branch or Mark Barron. So, I mean, that's just 2 extras you can just chuck in. So that's what, six guys at least. And then, the kind of people, when we're talking around 15, 16, it means he's going to be up against Stevie Brown, William Moore, these kind of guys. And I think if you're playing linebacker, you've got that potential. I mean, Eric Berry is a famous hybrid kind of safety linebacker role for Kansas, and he's been quite a force in the IDP circle. So Buchanan's got that potential here. Although we should have obviously mentioned that the 49ers have been notoriously poor in producing fantasy defensive backs. If we think about Dante Whitner, who's been very productive in the past and went to San Francisco, struggled to get over 75 total tackles. The issue obviously being the fact that their linebackers, Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis, are so effective.
Well, you may be confusing Buchanan there with Eric Reed and Jimmy Ward. They're at San Francisco. Buchanan's in Arizona, which is actually a wonderful situation. They have shown decent IDP production, and then plus you have to remember the fact that there's essentially huge question marks at linebacker with Kevin Minter and Larry Foote. So there could be a lot of tackles to go around there. Buchanan going off the board, if you're putting him in that same category of players like Cam Chancellor and some of the other guys that you mentioned, it's an interesting ceiling, very interesting ceiling. Now, of course, he'll be playing alongside Tyrann Mathieu, but not likely until at least week 3. Matthew's at least a month away, but it's really expected to be more like 2 months before he's back on the field, and even then it may be a little bit slow going before he gets fully up to speed. So, balance that with where you have him ranked. We have him, round about that 20, 25 range in our rankings, and I think that's fair because when he does get full speed, he has DB1 upside in any given week just because of his tackle production and big play upside. But for now, tempering a bit of our expectations on Matthew. Ross, some linebackers to note. Nigel Bradham, first and foremost, he gets a one-game suspension for a marijuana issue last year. Not a big deal, nothing really to worry about. He's really the favorite to play the weak side linebacker in an every down role for Buffalo, which means lots and lots of fantasy value. We saw that out of DeAndre Levy last year, who played that weak side linebacker in the Jim Schwartz defense. So, Bradham, moving up draft boards, where are you slotting him in your rankings?
Yeah, he's an interesting one. I think he's kind of that LB3 tier as well, Jeff. I don't know if I really want to push him into the LB2 range. I know everyone's going to see weak side linebacker replacing Kiko Alonso, but the thing to remember is Nigel Bradham isn't Kiko Alonso, and I'm not quite sure if he'll be used in quite the same way. Bradham's definitely a player you can grab late. I've grabbed him. He's one of those guys a bit like Brad Jones who's going pretty much undrafted in most leagues. Maybe people are kind of hedging their bets and wondering Preston Brown, but I think it's more of a case of Bradham's off the radar, so I think he should be on radars, he should be drafted, but I wouldn't get carried away and start expecting him to sort of, being up in that top 15, top 20 linebacker range.
Well, you don't have to draft him there, but it's not out of the question that he finishes the season there. Bradham is a solid run stuffer, so he can put up some tackles. Obviously, Brandon Spikes is also in Buffalo, too, and he's a bit of the same type of player. But Bradham is intriguing, really, really is, especially given the fact that Buffalo's home stats crew is the most tackle-friendly in the entire league. You got to like that, especially where he's going. So another player to possibly scoop later on. Again, even though you don't want to wait too long, you don't want to wait and put yourself in a really bad position, put yourself behind the eight ball on draft day, you can get away with waiting at the position and scooping some solid value like what we saw out of Ross, me, in this mock draft we're in, and then wait again. And then later on you can scoop players like Bradham and Jones at the tail end of the draft. Now, Ross, there may be some value to be had in Oakland with their linebacker situation, though it's a little bit up in the air. They did release veteran Kevin Burnett. The writing was kind of on the wall for this one. I don't think it comes as a huge shock. Burnett was capable last year, but not really anything extraordinary. Obviously, Khalil Mack will be playing the strong side linebacker, defensive end hybrid position, sort of Von Miller position that we're seeing becoming a much more frequent position in the NFL right now. Nick Roach will be there in the middle, and very likely, I can't see how he's not playing three downs. The question is at weak side linebacker. So my favorite to play that position doesn't look like he's going to, he's not getting the early edge at least, and that's C.O. Moore. Instead, it's the love child of Ross and Plaxico Burress, Miles Burris at weak side linebacker, who's actually getting the look there. Ross, I know this guy's was a little bit of a favorite of yours 2 seasons ago, missed all last year, but how are you processing what's going on in Oakland?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Jeff. He is a guy who I picked up in rookie drafts a couple of years ago and sort of reaped the rewards on when he got on the field, a little bit unexpectedly. But the problem was he wasn't that great in coverage, and he did get benched, essentially, and they did draft C.O. Moore. Perhaps drafting Mack and his pass rushing skills is a bit too much of a clash with Moore. It's an interesting one. Burris is still sitting on a couple of my dynasty rosters, so I'm glad I kept hold of him, but I wouldn't get carried away. I mean, if you're playing in a deep league and you end up rostering about 5 or 6 linebackers, he might be the guy I roster as my 5th or 6th linebacker, depending on how smart the other guys in the league are and who they picked up. We've already mentioned some interesting sleepers, but so yeah, Burris is on my radar, but he's probably not going to be on too many teams.
Yeah, interesting note about Burris. In 2012, when he played essentially most of the season, he had 893 snaps. He graded out as Pro Football Focus's worst outside linebacker in 4-3 defenses. So, really struggling there in coverage. So 3-down role is not going to be likely if he does somehow sneak out this starting gig. Now, there's still some other linebacker news. We turn to Tennessee. We have Zach Brown opening camp as a starter next to Wesley Woodyard. By the way, folks, Ross, you've been banging the drum for this. I've been banging the drum for this. Wesley Woodyard is going way too late in drafts, so take advantage of that and take him before somebody else steps up and takes him. I actually took him as, I think, the 16th linebacker off the board in that mock draft we were talking about earlier. He's going to put up numbers. Don't be dissuaded by last year. Last year was the product of injury. He's the guy in this. He's the play caller, so he's the guy. He's going to put up numbers. But Brown's out there, and Ross Brown's a guy who we've seen really struggle against the run, decent in coverage, so would at least project to a 3-down role. If he does get this starting job. I don't know. I mean, I'm really reluctant with this guy to even move him into my rankings. Have you changed your thoughts on him based on the current news?
Not really, Jeff. I mean, like you said, I've been huge on Woodyard. He's shaping up to be one of my favourite linebackers, sleeper-wise. I don't know if you can call a linebacker to a sleeper, but underrated this season. But Brown, yeah, he's a guy who wasn't that hot on last year either. So, I'm hearing all this sideline to side. I swear, when I made the notes for the show, Jeff, I must have written sideline to sideline about 3 or 4 different guys, Brown being one of them. Another guy who we Keenan Robinson in Washington, who Jay Gruden is raving about. He's calling him sideline to sideline. He's going to obviously be playing alongside Perry Riley. So there's a lot of these kind of guys who are being promised bigger roles and talking about athleticism. I don't know, does Robinson do anything for you? Would you compare him to Brown?
I think they're in that same kind of tier of players, certainly offering upside. Another player with sideline to sideline that I've talked about a lot is Emmanuel Lamore. For me, if I'm going to take a risk on one of these guys, there's just something about Lamore that's really intriguing to me. I know I've had a couple people on Twitter, fairly consistently asking me about Robinson. I mean, my expectations are still tempered for him. I am not saying he can't break out and be a potential LB3, but I want to see it first. I really want to see a little bit more out of him, which I know is completely contradictory because we haven't seen anything out of Lamore. But for me, I'm just, I guess, a little bit lower on him in just that system as opposed to Lamore just gets me excited. But that's part of it with these sleepers. It's who's the guy gets you most excited is the guy you have to go with.
Exactly, Jeff, and that's the thing. I mean, when you're dealing with guys who we haven't seen on the field and maybe we haven't got a big sample size to build a stat profile of, you have to resort to historical data, like how have people done in this position before, in this scheme, under this coach, in this role, and you have to base your feeling on that, and you know certain coaches and certain schemes produce points, and if you're saying the merger guy, the merger guy.
Exactly, and that's how you got to build your draft board. Eventually, at a point, we all sort of become, we are all sort of doing guesswork with this stuff. If we really knew how the rankings would end up in the end of the year, that hey, I'm not podcasting right now. I'm not sharing my rankings on our site or anything. I'm going out and winning all that money for myself. But the guesswork is part of building the draft board.
Using DraftKings money, Jeff, you'd be playing on DraftKings, surely.
I'm gonna go live in Vegas, at the top of some hotel or something, and just kick it right now. That would be the dream. But anyway, Ross, we're still living the dream here at Pro Football Focus Fantasy, talking IDP as always. We'll be back with another edition of the Fantasy Slant very soon. Lots going on in the preseason, lots to get caught up on, and lots of draft boards to build. So for Pro Football Focus, he's Ross Miles. I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and that's a wrap.